We have a great group of panelists joining us here talking about the future of the 21st century in technology and policy, and especially the intersection thereof. So because we're limited on time, I would like to start with introductions. I would like to begin by inviting the Honorable Meade Treadwell, former Lieutenant Governor of Alaska, Chair of the U.S. Arctic Research Commission from 2006 to 2010 to the stage. I'd like to invite Mr. Bruno Gruno, Regional Director of the Cold Climate Housing Research Center and the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, up to the stage as well. Bruno, welcome. Ms. Leslie Canavera, CEO of Pole Arctic, an AI Oceans Solutions company. Come on up. Mr. George Rode, Director of the Arctic Energy Office in the U.S. Department of Energy. Please come on up. Ms. Shana Wisdom, Director of the Alaska Ocean Observing System. Please join us on the stage. And finally, Mr. Isaac Vanderberg, CEO of Launch Alaska. And finally, Ms. Heather Reams, President of Citizens for Responsible Energy Solutions Forum. Please join us on the stage. Welcome. Come on up, have a seat. You did? Yep. Well, we'll share it. We'll share it. Great. Welcome, everybody. Well, most of everybody. Oh, there they are. Isaac, ever the rock star, jogging up late. Meade, how you doing? Uh-oh.
I think I got the problem.
That's okay. Cool. Welcome. Please have a seat. Great. So now we have everybody. Super excited to have everybody here, and thank you all for joining us. So because we have so many experts on stage, and we're fortunate to be able to hear from all of them, I want to invite some initial brief remarks. I want to make sure that we have time for everybody. So if we could, we'll just do 3 to 5 minutes of remarks so we can get into discussion. Ms. Reams, I'd love to invite you to go first.
This works, right? Hi. Hey, I'm Heather Reams. I'm the president of Citizens for Responsible Energy Solutions and CRESS, also known as CRESS and CRESS Forum. We are an advocacy group based in Washington, D.C., and we advocate for a cleaner environment. We want to see reduced emissions and a common sense approach. We traditionally look at policy from 3 lenses, kind of 3 legs of a stool, if you will, an energy independence, and affordability, an economic lens, as well as the environmental lens. We do a lot of work in engaging with Republicans and thinking about a clean tech future. And so I think my remarks will be focused mainly on that. I know you're told us you'd run a tight ship, so I'm going to stop right there.
Thanks. Isaac, would you like to chat a little bit about Launch Alaska next?
Sure. Can you hear me? Oh, it worked. Okay, it's already on. Hi, everyone. My name is Isaac Vanderberg. I'm the CEO for Launch Alaska. And we are a tech deployment accelerator. So our organization basically has 2 parts. We run a 8-month, kind of like a Shark Tank, where we recruit climate tech companies from anywhere in the world, introduce them to Alaska asset owners, so like utilities and infrastructure owners in the state, ports. And over the course of 8 months, we basically select a small group of companies that come into our portfolio. And the reason we select them is because they've signed some kind of a contract or a letter of interest or a joint development agreement with an Alaska asset owner to actually develop a project. And so that's the one side of the organization. The other side of the organization are innovation projects, where we're working with a lot of those same asset owners I mentioned before to help them kind of get going on their own plans to decarbonize and electrify their infrastructure. So there are a lot of projects in Alaska that have been talked about for many years but are kind of stuck. And so that whole side of the organization, the innovation projects, is to try to get a lot of those projects unstuck. The 3 areas we focus on at Launch Alaska are transportation, energy, and industry. So it's really working with innovative companies and kind of forward-looking asset owners in the state to help them decarbonize in those 3 areas. The thing that I would say, I know I'm on a timer here. The thing I would say is that I feel like a lot of the technologies that we really need to get going on on energy transition are already in hand. What we really need to focus on now is deploying at scale the kind of technologies that are ready to go. And I think Alaska is this world-class place where companies can do just that. And we'll talk more about some of the policy barriers, I think, that exist for us to get going. And I really think that's what it is. It's the kind of policy world that needs to catch up with what's ready to go today. I think a lot of the technologies are ready to go. So anyhow, I'll give it over to the next panelist here. Thanks. Thank you, Isaac. Shannon?
I'm just excited to be here in person, although I had to dust off clothes and pants and to get ready for this again. So I started as the executive director of the Alaska Ocean Observing System, or AOS, just 15 months ago. So my entire tenure has been virtual. So it's very exciting to not see Hollywood squares here. For those of you that don't know, AOS is part of a National Integrated Ocean Observing System, or IOS, and we're funded by NOAA and other external grants to produce, integrate, collect, do all kinds of different ocean data for different stakeholder use. And I use stakeholder very widely. It's kind of everyone from National Weather Service forecasters all the way to subsistence whalers in communities. Our largest challenge that we really face is we're a smaller funding organization that really tries to connect people and be a conduit. And it's a huge coastline to try to really connect everyone together. And so we really struggle with that. And so to do this, we partner with the right partners. And that, having worked in Alaska for 16 years as an environmental consultant, it's all about partnerships, who you work with, trying to find the right type of innovations that work. And I just have a few examples to show, like we work with the Alaska Marine Exchange to put weather services on AIS sensors so that mariners have real-time data. We work with the Alaska Eskimo Whaling Commission to use innovative technology like the new SOFAR wave buoy, which is a small buoy about this big, a little bit bigger than a basketball, that can be deployed by and owned by communities. So we really work on leveraging those type of partnerships, innovations to make things work in Alaska.
Thank you. George Rowe?
Yeah, I'm George Rowe. I'm the director for the Arctic Energy Office at the U.S. Department of Energy. We have three main focus areas at the Department of Energy. One is combating the effects of climate change. Two is looking at energy transition in this very difficult transitioning environment. The third, which undergirds everything else, is energy justice. Energy justice is something that I want to talk about right now. So the challenge that we have right now is that much of the literature that we have available for guiding investment in energy projects focuses on electricity. Heat is, in some cases, 80% of the total energy use in communities in Alaska. We have to gather data to understand that challenge and figure out what should we do to address that. And underscoring something that Isaac said, I'm an engineer, technologist. Shiny objects are not what we need. We need policy change. We need partnership change. We need to create funding mechanisms that do not compete communities against one another, when in fact we could enable communities to work together and share workforce, share capital, share lessons learned. That's what I want us to do. So my agency cross-cuts the Department of Energy. So there's no office in the Department of Energy that I cannot engage. We cross-cut the federal agents, all of the agencies, and we're circumpolar. So we want to be a resource for the people of Alaska and the people of the Arctic to address the challenges that are present here and abroad. I invite you back to this very facility, May 23rd, for Arctic X. We are going to be bringing together some of the shiny object aspects, but also different kinds of innovation, focusing on commercialization and partnerships to bring the right technology to the right place with the right people engaged. So I really hope you ask some really hard questions, because I'm looking forward to hearing our responses. So thank you.
Thank you, George. And Leslie, please go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Leslie Canavera, the CEO of Polarctic, and we're a data science and oceanographic company, and we see the Arctic between a rock and a hard place or an uncharted rock and sea ice. And what we do is we find both. We build artificial intelligence and machine learning models to be able to address the challenges that we have with climate change and have our communities be able to adapt to them. So we have 3 areas of focus that we really have. Our sea ice forecast, where we're able to use different spatial and temporal resolutions to adjust for the different groups and organizations that are actually in the ocean and looking for more resolution than maybe they have currently. We have a nearshore bathymetry, where we're able to look at the shallow nearshore and identify the changes in that with storms or lack of sea ice, and be able to model that at a regional scale. And then we have an aquaculture and mariculture focus as well, where we're looking at fishing and kelp and different ways that groups can get food security through this. So we see the Arctic as a data desert, and I know that's been addressed in other panels, is this data scarcity element. And the way artificial intelligence works is it can combine these in new and unique ways and novel ways to adjust and adapt to some of those gaps. And that's been our experience in some of the projects that we've worked on and how this AI can learn. And we think that policy should be able to follow some of this science and some of these projects in these small scales to be able to work towards bigger scales and larger communities. So we had a project in Nunavut, Canada, where we were able to train the first artificial intelligence model trained on indigenous knowledge, satellite data, and university trawl data. The model was able to identify where the different species of interests were, extrapolate to new areas, identified an uncharted subsurface seamount that changed the circulation patterns for the community, and be able to address that and move forward from a food security perspective for the community. And this was a public-private partnership that paid for this project, and it was a great example of something that we could bring back to Alaska. As an Alaska native, I feel passionate about trying to bring this technology back into our communities to be able to adjust to this. So I'll end there.
Awesome, thank you so much. Bruno.
Well, thank you. And hello, I am Bruno Gruno. Yep, the name does rhyme. You heard that right. And I'll just start by saying I'm not from Alaska, but I got here as quickly as I could. And I love it here. I'm going to stay here. And to borrow from my friend Kenny Bell, he's like, I'm not native, but I am a friend and neighbor, and this is where I live and work. I am the regional director of the National Renewable Energy Laboratory's Cold Climate Housing Research Center. We are up in Alaska. We are on the traditional territories of the Lower Tanana, Dene, Athabascan people. And up there, and of course, we serve all around Alaska. We serve the Arctic. We serve even the Lower 48 in cases. What we do is we do a lot of work with building science, but it's not about just getting great research. It's how do we put it to use? How do we make it useful? We do a lot of analysis. We work with communities. We bring the tools to the communities. And we work together with the communities to come up with outputs that work for those communities. And this is through the lens of energy, housing, and buildings. I'll give you a quick example. We worked with the community of Unalakleet several years ago, and the community said, hey, we have a problem. Housing shortage. And we've all heard the theme, there's a housing shortage, right? And a shortage of even healthy housing, even if there are boxes to live in. We have elders are leaving. They're leaving for hub communities, and with that goes some of this generational knowledge. We also don't want, while we need housing, we don't want you bringing in housing from outside, because we have people who are skilled and talented. Maybe not we can't build the whole house. We can build a lot of the house. We said, well, let's work with that. So we co-developed, we worked with this community and said, what if we just built in town the most complex, most laborious parts of the house, the parts with the water, the sewer, the part where you need, mechanical folks. In this case, this is a kitchen, bathroom, mechanical room that we built in a connex. Built it here in town. Worked with the community every month. We got together, make sure every decision is in locks up with the community. Now ship that box out, that Connex out, ship it out to Unilocate where they're preparing a foundation. And here this summer, the crew, the community is going to build the house, a super energy efficient, affordable house around it. So you can think of it as it's being plugged in like a cassette tape into a cassette deck. And what we're going to get is a durable house, a healthy house, and a house that costs less to build than the house next door, and also a house that uses a fraction of the energy from the house next door. And so this came together not because we have great, incredible engineers and scientists, which we do, but it's because we work with communities. And so, when I think, well, we're talking about policy, it's the what and the how. I think about, like, for one, I like to talk about the energy justice. I think it's worth bringing up, getting technology into the corners of the Arctic. I want to think about what the transforming communities looks like in this, transforming world, how we can support them that way. What does that look like through housing and clean energy? What does it look like for strengthening economies, right? We're in a capitalist society, like it or not, and the economy is the engine. And so we want to strengthen that. And then lastly, of course, we're in a changing climate, so how do we enhance our resilience and security of our communities? So I'm looking forward to having more discussion here. Thanks for the opportunity to be here.
Okay, thanks for being here. And Mead, after you.
Hi, I'm Mead Treadwell. I'm a former lieutenant governor. I'm a former chair of the U.S. Arctic Research Commission, but kind of prompted by Rachel's discussion this morning about the kid in Diomede. I was 18 years old when I found myself on a mountaintop in the foothills of Denali with my brother, and I looked out at this beautiful, inspiring place, and I said, there's no way in the world I ever want to live anywhere else. And the main thing about living here in Alaska and having had the luck in my career to help bring together Arctic cooperation, first in environmental cooperation and political cooperation and in cross-border investment. The luck is that we live in a place that, despite the challenges that we've just talked about, is a place that is loaded, absolutely loaded with opportunity. And one of the things I learned is that we are not separate from the rest of the world. We're a place the rest of the world needs to prove up their opportunities. We had a session at Commonwealth North probably 30 years ago, and they had a Scientific Atlanta. It said if it had not been for Alaska building out its telecommunications system, he wouldn't have had a company selling dishes with geosynchronous satellites. I chair an advisory board for Iridium. We cover the poles, north and south, and we fill in the gaps in the world in that technology. I've had a chance to work with many of the people on this panel, and all of us in Alaska are used to things that a lot of people are not used to, finding ourselves at the crossroads between science, technology, policy, markets, and capital. And that's what this group does. We've done what we can to expand our capability to finance with startup funds like Isaac's. We've done our things to make sure that we have a porous university. So by porous, we don't want a poor university, but we want a porous university where knowledge comes in and goes out easily. And when you see what Pole Arctic is doing, for example, or my daughter who's painting down there but just finished her master's in geomatics using LiDAR to chart parts of the Arctic, similar technology. We have to bring knowledge in and out. And so the book I haven't written yet is called Sourdough Starters, Startup Strategies from a Startup State. We'll get around to it. But the amazing thing about this place is the place that invented the kayak, the place that invented the trampoline and the blanket toss to find that, the place that invented sunglasses, or about the same time the Chinese were slicing jade very thin to cover the eyes of their judges, and we were doing snow goggles. The place that perfected was the early adopter of containerized shipping. The place that was the early adopter of geosynchronous remote satellites before cable TV. The place that was the early adopter and is the world's leader yet in wind diesel technologies. The place that is the early adopter of new tidal systems beneath the inlet. We are one of the world's best proving grounds. And I guess I'll just say, I'll actually talk about my day job on a panel tomorrow, Ben, but as part of my day job, one of the things that we struggle with a whole lot is one giant opportunity for the world, which is decarbonization. Now, you get people who talk about renewable energy, and you get people who talk about green hydrogen and blue hydrogen and all that. All I'm going to say is that I'm optimistic, because in 1970, when I entered high school, we were passing the Clean Air Acts, and nobody said we could get rid of smog. We got rid of SOx and NOx, and we used all sorts of technologies in the refinery end, in the catalytic end at the end of our tailpipes, and we did a pretty good job of it. I believe we're going to do it with carbon. We're going to do it not by demonizing the energy we have, but cleaning up the energy we have and empowering the energy that can come forward. And one of the coolest, it's probably your next question, but I'll just leave it at this. I think one of the coolest sets of opportunities that we have in Alaska and the Arctic is decarbonization. We've got more natural gas than pretty much every other place in the world. And that can be, is the easiest fossil fuel to clean up, one end or the other. And there's also a worldwide jump ball right now on what's the best way to turn that into hydrogen. We've got the opportunities with tidal, with geothermal, with solar, that if you can make it work here, you can make it work anywhere. And we have a world that is looking to do it without substantially raising the cost of energy. And so what better place to try and test these things where the cost of energy is higher, and then we can bring it down the learning curve. So that's what excites me, is I'm still that 18-year-old kid sitting on a mountaintop seeing huge opportunity here, and looking forward to the panel. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And thanks to all of you for your remarks. Great set of diverse experience here, and I appreciate all your perspectives. I am getting one note. Please make sure to hold the microphone close to your mouth when you're speaking into it, so that we can all hear you well, because I know you've got great things to say. Mead, I will actually start with you and work back down. I got a question for everybody. I think the biggest question in my mind is, what is, this is a panel talking about the intersection of technology and policy, right? We often see, we've got experts in both. We often see that one side may sometimes be in tension with the other. In your mind, what is one of the largest hurdles in technology or in policy that would let what you're working on come to fruition to the next step? Is it a technological basis, or is it a policy holdup that is holding back what you're trying to work on? Or perhaps it's economic. What's your thought?
I think one of the things about tech and policy is that policymakers often forget that technology can solve problems and make things better, and they write rules as if it's always going to be the way it is. And technology makers often forget that government can be an early adopter. It can do sorts of things that enable, especially if it could change its policy about how technology changes. So I not only believe in porous universities where things move in and out, but I also believe in governments where you've got science that moves in and out, and a good relationship there. And I guess I would just say this: we are doing a lot of small things to try to develop an an investment climate here in the Arctic. You'll hear from PT Capital in a later panel. I was president of that company, was on the board, where we put together the first cross-border private equity firm. You've heard from venture capitalists in earlier panels today. We're trying to create that ecosystem of investment. You're an example, actually, on both sides of that. And I guess I have to say, if you get government to understand that, that's good. And if you get technology to understand that you shouldn't be relying on the government, I know people who've had a string of SBIRs but have never really gotten to market. You want to see that relationship with the market. I will say this, and this is kind of a fun thing. Several of us here in this room are members of the State Committee on Research, and we created something called the Alaskan Innovation Hall of Fame a few years ago. And we did it to help remind Alaskans that we actually are an innovative place. It's kind of like the The Wizard of Oz, the Cowardly Lion getting a medal. Gee, you do have courage. The amazing things that we adopt here, and part of those 49 state startup strategies is that we are early adopters as well as inventors, and we really help each other.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks for that comment. And it's funny, in my aerospace industry, you know, we are running into exactly that. And I think if you look 56 years ago, it was all government. And then the first wave of privatization was often, and still really is, a lot of people in garages working through SBIRs and trying to get to that next level. And so it's interesting to have you make that parallel note here for us, because it's now maturing to the point where aerospace is its own industry, really standing on its own commercially. It would be great to see that replicated.
I just found a paper I wrote with head of planetary science at Johnson Space Center in the 80s, where we were talking about autonomous robots on the moon that would help mine lunar fuel. And it turns out that we spent a huge amount of time in the paper suggesting that we even think about economics and commercialization of space. And it was, and to go back and look at what we wrote then and what you and others have done now is incredible. Government needs to understand that commercial partners and empowering investment will help move us along much faster.
Absolutely. Thank you. Bruno, I want to ask you the same question. So in the work you're doing, is it a policy barrier? Is it an economic barrier? Is it a technological barrier? What's holding you back? What would you want to wave the magic wand towards to make things move forward for what you're doing with housing research?
Yeah, well, so I guess I have to say with the NREL hat on, we don't do policy, so I'll just put that up front. So that's my disclaimer. I'd also say that we're not waiting on a silver bullet, I think, technologically. I mean, what are our goals? Our goals, and you're here today, okay, we want to support, clean energy transition. Cool, we have that. I've already mentioned housing, and we want to solve that. There's not a silver bullet we're waiting on. There's going to be some great things that are going to be coming down the pike. But we have the tools we need right now at our fingertips to get us there. We have the tools we need to make the decisions to get us there for planning. Say, for instance, a community wants to go, reduce energy use, change the way where they want to draw their energy from. We have those tools. We're not waiting on it. I think it's sheer will. We have to make decisions here and put the resources towards supporting that. Biggest challenge, and now I'm not saying pie in the sky. I don't think tomorrow, Ukjuagvik's going to run off of solar, right? That's not reality. But I think for a big part of the Arctic, I think a big part of the circumpolar north, we're not waiting for the technology to get us there. I think that we can take pretty good strides with what we've got if we're willing to do it.
So if I'm reading between the lines, are you saying, is it political will or is it community will? What sort of willpower are we talking about?
I'm being careful.
This is on the record.
I'm being careful. There are visions for creating this, and there are some who push for that. There are some who are pushing back, and it's complicated. It's not easy. I want to honor that too. It's not easy. It's not easy. Like, oh, we can just run the Arctic off of solar. But if we dedicate resources, energy, time, money toward it, I think we can solve it. Yeah.
Thank you, Leslie. I'm curious. You're sitting right in the middle of policy and technological and economic model experts here, and you are our startup on the panel. So I would love to get the startup's perspective. What are your challenges in going to market? What are your hurdles? Having built a startup myself, I know that some days it's just trying to get people to pay attention, but once you get past that, what's the hook? What's holding you guys back from scaling the way you want to scale, or are you perfectly on path and everything's going your way?
As a startup, you know that nothing goes to plan.
I was going to let you take the easy way out if you wanted to.
So it's been a real great journey. We have had a lot of success with organizations that we've been a part of for networking through the Arctic Economic Council or through the Alaska Ocean Cluster. And Lisa Murkowski just introduced some legislation to incorporate these ocean clusters all over the United States. And I think that is an amazing policy that will help technologies like ours be able to grow, because the ocean cluster has been a network for us and a resource that we didn't originally know we even needed, but they've been fantastic in getting us connected to groups to test our technology and be able to work with Bering Sea crabbers to create this forecast for ice to be able to show at different resolutions and different time periods for 5, 10, 15 days out to be able to see that. And what we can do with that is so many different things of being able to apply it to different areas, different technologies, but having the resource to be able to get us a foot in the door and where we're not cold calling people as a startup who people have never heard of Polarctic, then I think it's been a great resource and amazing for us as coming into Alaska again, kind of, and trying to bring this business.
That's fantastic. And I wanted to ask you, you made a really interesting note during your remarks about scaling indigenous knowledge, which I thought it was fantastic. And I think probably has a lot of applications beyond what you were doing as far as preserving language, managing lands, managing resources, as well as just learning how to live in harmony in the place that we are. I was curious what sort of work you had to do to figure out how to bring those into your models, where you're working with something very quantitative, perhaps in some respects, buoy data, different things like that, but then also working in the local wisdom, even as that wisdom changes in the changing climate. How do you strike that balance, and how do you work those things in?
Talk to the communities. The first thing you need to do is talk to the people. Again, I spent time in the federal government, and we always would joke that, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Sorry. But it's one of those things where you need to talk to the people and find out what they want, how they want to be participating, because you can't go in there and dictate to them, like, hey, this is what I need from you. You need to understand and build that relationship. And I think that's really important to understand from a developing perspective, and then also including this indigenous knowledge of how do we work with these people in a way that's respecting them and their culture, what they want to share, what they don't want to share, and how do we protect it.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. George, in your remarks, I was really caught on to your talk on energy justice, and I know that's something that you're passionate about, and I wanted to just kind of kick you off and let you tell us more about it, because I think it might be a bit of a new concept for some. What are we talking about when we talk about energy justice specifically in the Arctic, and what are some first steps that we can start to take in order to get to better parity?
Yeah, thank you. So energy justice refers basically to situations where either historically individuals are left behind because of investments in one place and not another, they're downwind of toxic effects from energy installations, or they're in an economic situation where they cannot meet their human needs. In the lower 48, you're in an high energy burden situation if 6% of your income goes to your energy needs. I defy you to find a single person in Alaska that's not in double-digit energy burden. This is an unacceptable situation, and we need to figure out how can we find more affordable ways to address our needs for heat, for transportation, and for power. So that's right. I feel very strongly about this.
Great, thanks. I'm glad to hear that. And one other thing that caught my ear, I think as an engineer, I often get wrapped up into the world of the shiny tech toys. And I appreciated your perspective. It's something we see all the time where somebody will start a company based around some really cool new shiny technological thing, and then we're like, but how do you stay in business? What is it that you do? Translating that to your world, I'm curious about if you have a position on micronuclear, because I saw, I noted down 80% of some of the energy being heat related, and there could be an opportunity for cogen. Do you see that as a real opportunity for the Arctic? Is it a shiny toy? Is it something else? What do you think?
The thing is so cool about microgrids in the north is, like in Alaska, it's all we got. And I've heard people come up here from my own, not my office, but our organization at the Department of Energy, telling people in Alaska they need to think about microgrids. And I'm like, talk to the people. That's kind of a good idea. And so what I think is that in some cases, what we need more resilience in our energy systems. We need to figure out, why are they breaking when they do break? How can we complement the resources that we have with other kinds of resources? How can we bring in solar or storage to make the diesel system operate more efficiently? Only use it when we need it. How can we generate sustainable fuels that we can use locally? How can we integrate structures? So like Bruno didn't talk about half the thousands of great things that they are doing at the National Renewable Energy Lab and at the Cold Climate Housing Research Center. Isaac didn't get a chance to talk through some of the amazing technologies that they've evolved. I know 3 companies that have come through Launch Alaska who learned more about the market here and now are profitable because of what they learned in the state of Alaska. To your point, Mead, that there is knowledge here. It's microgrids, but it's way beyond microgrids.
Okay, thank you very much. I was curious for you, Shana, what sort of data gaps are you seeing? You know, is it something where like Pole Arctic is a potential solution? Are you seeing other types of data gaps? And what are your hopes for those being filled, right? Are you hoping that it's coming through other startups? Are you hoping that it's coming through further deployments through grants? What is the model that you're seeing for fixing some of these gaps you're experiencing?
I would say it's really one of the things the last 2 years have taught us, right, is when we can't access communities, that we need to push ourselves to empower communities to do this on their own, using affordable, easy to use, inexpensive technology where they can collect those data for themselves that then bleeds into all of it. So there's groups like Alutiiq Marine Institute out of Seward and the Alaska Eskimo Whaling Commission and Native Village of Kotzebue that have amazing work going on, and we can help by kind of navigating the grant system, because that's a tough thing to do. Grants operate on a very short timeline, which doesn't always work in communities. And so groups like AUS and others can really help that. So it's empowering communities is, in my opinion, is the way we can kind of deal with those data gaps. But we're always gonna have data gaps because we have such a huge area to cover, and it's so expensive to get data. And so I think it's that empowering communities to really get those information.
I appreciate that, thank you. Are you gathering data specifically terrestrial, or are you also getting any space-based data? Are you trying to work in multimodal data of that nature, or where is it coming from predominantly?
Ours is ocean observing, so it's the coasts and oceans. There's some of the near shore. We do our work by kind of looking at it on all kinds of different levels. So there's wave buoys, we have gliders in the water, we have high-frequency radar systems that are shore-based that collect surface currents. So we're kind of equipment agnostic. We'll take whatever, and our job as the conduit between federal and private and community and stakeholder is to be open to whatever. And there's ways that we can pull information like what you're talking about into our portal that's already out there for everyone. It can be visualized by different groups. So we're a great conduit to really help move things forward in a way that's funded federally, but open to, it's really stakeholder driven and policy neutral.
Awesome, thank you very much. And Isaac, we'll get to you in 1 second. I just want to invite the audience to please text in questions for our panel. We'll be transitioning over to audience questions here shortly, and we'd love to hear what you guys are curious about. So, Isaac, what I am curious about is, what Mead and Bruno and George and pretty much everybody's touched on is Alaska and the Arctic is a great place to show that things work. How do we keep people here after that? How do we not just be a beta test, and how do we keep people engaged and create jobs here long term, which I know is obviously a focus for what you guys are doing with your deployments. What sort of patterns are you seeing, and what sort of incentive?
Thanks, Ben. That's really not the question that I thought you were going to ask me. So,
Sorry.
thinking on my feet. No, it's good. It's good. You said you were going to throw me a curveball, so this is perfect. So, I think that's a really interesting question to ask. The positive thing that I think we can all get excited about is that I actually don't think the pitch to companies or individuals or folks with families to move to Alaska is as hard as we think it is. It's been really interesting. I mean, we don't have a huge data set at Launch Alaska. We have 31 companies, right, that are part of our portfolio. But out of that 31, one group just moved up out into the valley and they've bought land and they're building a house and moving their whole family up here. Like another company, Signal, just moved their U.S. headquarters to Anchorage. They're a group based out of the UK. I mean, I think Brexit helped a little bit on that. But still, they could have gone anywhere in the U.S. and they decided to be in Anchorage, Alaska because they think that we're this, air and aviation tech crossroads of the world. And I think also, the lower 48 is getting hot and crowded, and there are things that are on fire. And I think that is actually working in our favor. And also, COVID is another kind of, macro vector that people are going, if I could do this job from anywhere in the world, wouldn't it be nice to be in a place like Alaska where, as Mead said, once you step foot in the place, you never want to leave. And so I've actually it's not why we did what we're doing at Launch Alaska, that wasn't the primary thing. But I've been really impressed to see how many folks just come here and they're just blown away. And I think there's a real hopeful sign there if we want that. if we want to attract and recruit some of these exciting tech companies, and we show that we want that through our policy and kind of how we welcome them at all kinds of different ways in the state. If we want that, I think they will come and they want to be here. And I can talk at length about why that is, but I think there's some really special kind of natural assets in Alaska that are attractive to folks.
Awesome, yeah, thanks. And I am curious, this panel is the intersection of technology and policy. I feel like you're sitting right there and working often with different labs and also working with a lot of different startups that are bringing their technologies. Like, where does policy versus technology fit in for you? What are you seeing as like holdups to your deployments or holdups to what companies want to accomplish here?
Yeah, so one thing you didn't ask, which is on the finance and money side, as other folks have I think pointed out, I think if you are someone that has a climate technology or a technology that can decarbonize, kind of any of these processes, energy, transportation, industry, there is so much money out there right now. It's just crazy. Like, we're part of a $75 million venture fund that focuses on climate tech. There's one of those funds like on every street corner in the US right now. It's just crazy. So if you're an entrepreneur, it's definitely your time in that world. And also with project finance, all sorts of infrastructure projects. Like, these are the projects now, which is a total change from 5 years ago. These are the projects that are that's the quality. That's the ones that investors are looking at. And there are all kinds of different kinds of money that are coming into this space. So I really think the finance side of this, and then the government and some interesting kind of infrastructure spending, another source of funding. So on the policy side, I'm going to answer your question obliquely, which is that one interesting thing, so we have all these companies that come in, they start interacting with utilities, rural utilities and utilities on the rail belt here. They talk to some of those infrastructures in the state and folks who are working here, and they get really excited about working here and really excited about projects, and then inevitably they run into some kind of barrier that just doesn't make sense. And they're coming from places all over the world that have different policy schemes than we have, or different policy structures that we have. And while I can give you a short list of things, they're like my cheat sheet, I do have a bit of a recency bias, and I'll kind of regurgitate what I just heard in the last few days. But things like treating independent power producers as utilities for tax purposes, things like getting that renewable portfolio standard pushed through in the legislature. Like, these are all good things. But what I'm really excited about, and maybe a bit of like a soft announcement here from Launch, is that we recognize that there is this gap between some of those companies that Mead was talking about, some of these innovators, and the policymakers in the state at the local, state, and also federal level, where we are getting requests from those policymakers saying, how can we see the opportunity for Alaska to lead, we see the opportunity in energy transition, what is that cheat sheet of policy barriers that we need to be pushing on? And I'm always like, I kind of stutter through it. I don't have a great response. And so we're standing up this year at Launch Alaska, this kind of third part of the organization, which is named to be determined, but a policy lab, policy coalition, climate tech engine, not sure what the name of it is, but as a way to kind of connect those investors, those startup companies with the policymakers in the state, and just kind of mash it all together. And one thing that I think is really exciting, an innovation that we don't think about a lot, but I think Alaska, we're so small that we know our senators and we know folks like Meade and the governor's office and folks who are at all levels of state government. And that's a really unique thing. I mean, no matter how you sit on ranked choice voting, that is a policy innovation that the rest of the country is looking at and saying, how do they do that in Alaska? And so I think if we do again, decide we want to lead in kind of setting some of those policies that allow us to unlock that energy transition, we have a really special opportunity here because we know everyone. Like, it's a small enough community that we have access to the folks who are really trying to work through some of these issues. So I'm very, very optimistic about that.
Awesome.
And like you.
Thank you so much. Heather, I'm curious, what challenge do you see lying ahead, working at kind of the intersection of like critical minerals and tech innovation? I think people don't really realize that if we switch everything over to batteries, we're going to need an awful lot of minerals to power that. What are you seeing there?
Yeah, I appreciate the question, and you were talking about the policy versus the technology challenges, and I think on the policy side, maybe one of what keeps me up at night, but it truly is one of the larger areas where we're spending a lot of time in our advocacy is access to rare earth and critical minerals. The International Energy Agency says by 2040, the demand for rare earth minerals will increase by 700%. We don't even know what that is, but it's a big number. For nickel, it's going to be 1,900%, big number, even bigger number. Cobalt, 2,100%, graphite, 2,500%, and lithium, 4,200%. These are incredible numbers. And then we think about who we're dealing with with critical minerals right now. With China, with Russia, 90% of the global rare earth elements are really controlled by China. 20% of the highest grade nickel is controlled by Russia. And then I look at here in Alaska, where I think it's got an outsized, ability to address some of the critical minerals issues, but and not having to rely on countries where they don't align with our human rights issues, our environmental qualities, the pay that we offer here, and just how we do it more cleanly here. So I think there are opportunities that we can share. But the policy barriers are significant, and I know both senators talk about this often in Washington, but I've heard it here being on the ground. I'm not an Alaskan. I live in the swamp of Washington, D.C., but it is a real thing. We've got it here in America, right here in Alaska. What's holding us back? And it's permitting. That it's a challenge to get permitting, and it sends a chill down any kind of effects for investors, for those who want to recycle, those who want to help unearth these minerals that we need for advanced society, for a cleaner society. That they aren't incentivized because the government's not giving clear signals. So that's I think one of the number one that we're working on is having the government send clear signals that we want to mine responsibly here in the United States and also responsibly with our trading partners.
Okay, thank you very much. And a quick follow-up based on that. So it sounds like beyond just the permitting, you're also thinking a lot about the investment portion and how I think there's a pretty couple clear lines, but can you share maybe some unobvious ways where like investments in clean energy can drive that next level of tech innovation? Is it specifically the pulling of the minerals out of the ground so these products that are already on the line can come off, or are we blocked in other ways from technological development in the areas you're working?
Yeah, supply chain issues overall have been, just had a chilling effect. People can't even buy a car. A combustion engine car. So now you're trying to get folks to say, well, let's think about an EV and how long it takes to get that, the components to be able to build a battery. There's so many barriers just for the average consumer to say, hey, I want to do that because it's better for the economy, it's better for me, it's better for the environment, and we're not sending the right signals. It's like we're missing a strategic plan to be able to say to the American people, hey, this is how you can be part of this clean energy transition. But a basic piece that we're missing is the critical minerals, and it's holding back so much. We're thinking about clean tech, not just investment, but just across and just the willingness and commercialization that people just want to be part of something, but they feel like they can't.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for your comments and letting me ask these questions. I want to switch now to audience questions, and please do keep them coming in if you have something you want to ask. Got a lot of good questions here to start with, and I'll just present them to whoever wants to take them, and if somebody who I think could give a good answer chooses not to, I may press you. But I'd like to start here. What tech innovations are we seeing in our rural and Alaska Native communities? Does anybody want to jump on that first?
Sure. I can look at it from the. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, easily from the building side. As far as building technology side, we've got advancements in. Number one, we just look at aside from technology, just the way we build is changing, right? I'd like to kind of just tie that back to the question you asked me: is it technology or is it policy? Thank you, Isaac, for bringing up this renewable portfolio standard. I promise I'm going to bring it back. The renewable portfolio standard is a great idea. Of course, for those who aren't familiar, the idea is that we'll get the rail belt to, it's legislation that the governor introduced to get the rail belt to 80% renewables by 2040. That is not based on if we get the technology here. The technology's here. That'll sort of force our hand in sort of implementing it. The second one is building code. Of course, we don't have a statewide building code. That would change things across the state, all the way across the state. A good example of a successful policy would be in the home energy rebate program that was done 2008, 2018, I think it was. An example, what that was is I think about $242 million investment by the state, and it wound up resulting in almost $1 billion of economic impact to the state. So those are examples. And circling back to rural Alaska, the technologies here that are making the biggest advancements, I think, not only in building envelope technology, but we're getting advancements in just clean boiler technology, heating and ventilation systems, right? That's one that's making their way out to energy efficient ventilation systems. So that out there.
Yeah. So I mentioned this Innovation Hall of Fame. If you look at some of the innovations, and by the way, you're a recipient of that. But
Was I?
no?
Got lost in the mail.
All right. One of the recipients was a team at GCI that figured out when I first got into the cell phone business in Alaska in the early 80s, a switch was going to cost me $7 million for each community that we wanted to serve. And we were trying to put together a program for a statewide cell network, which we have now. And that only works because GCI figured out basically how to put a local switch on a PC, all right? And reducing the cost of opening up in each community from the neighborhood of $7 or $8 million to $100,000. That technology went worldwide after that. If you look at what's happening in Cordova, and Clay Copeland is here with Cordova Electric, they're one of the first adopters of energy storage because they've got spare hydro and spare capability, and so we're doing that. There are several Alaskan pursuing new drone technologies. One of them is one of my favorites called Saberwing, which is looking at being able to pick up 1,000 to 2,000 pounds and carrying it 1,000 miles and depositing it robotically. And that's a company that's looking at Alaska markets, strong local markets, has local investors, and global markets. There are a couple of other drone companies coming along. With food, we've got a company here, Interstellar Labs is here this week at this conference, but they're developing kind of self-sustaining food pods that are here that might grow your food on Mars, but could also solve that problem in Diomede that we heard about this morning. So there is a huge amount of testing. The tidal project, Igiagavik and Ocean Renewable Power, is got global impact from what's going on. And I think the question before about how do you keep people here is, one of the people who was a recipient of this award was Jack Dangerman, who invented GIS technology, ESRI. And he talked about how if it hadn't been for his Alaska client saying, can you sell us the software as well as the service, that he wouldn't have had a software company, and we wouldn't have GIS software the way we did. And I kind of feel like we lost Jack. It would have been great to have that company here. And I think what we've got to do is just keep chasing these things and try to ultimately see this. We don't have enough of a TAM, a totally, total accessible, a target market for here to keep some of these technologies here, but let's see what we can do to do that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you very much. George, did you have a thought on that?
Yeah, I'd like to tell a story about two communities. One is the community of Kongiganac. One of the things that you hear about Kongiganac is their wind to heat program. So they have been able to integrate electrothermal stoves from the lower 48, but they're integrating them with smart meters so that they're not spilling or curtailing any of their wind. They're able to use this wind energy that otherwise would not have been useful to heat their homes. And as they offset their heating fuel requirements, I remember one of the guys there saying, like, you know, I'm using the same amount of fuel as I was. The good news is I'm using the fuel for what I want to use it for. I want to go out in my snow machine. I want to go out on my side-by-side. I'm not using it to keep my house warm because the stove is doing that. The turbines are doing that. The thing that's so cool about this happening in Kongiganac is that they're actually part of a group called the Chininic Wind Group. There's 3, I think, other communities that are walking that same path and learning from one another. That's innovation in and of itself. The community of Shungnak up in the Northwest Arctic Borough, they have gone diesel off using solar and batteries. This is like really far north. And being able to do, obviously they can't do that in the winter, but the capability of doing that is huge technically. But what's even huger is that they are doing that in collaboration with the Alaska Village Electric Cooperative Utility in town. And AVEC operates community utilities in 57 other communities. So the lessons learned potential for gathering that innovation from that community will span the state, literally. That's innovation too. It's not just shiny objects. It's working together.
Could I just add real quickly that Alaska Native corporations, I jokingly refer to them as like Alaska's first startups, but I think that whole model of how ANCs were set up is super innovative and continues to be a model for the rest of the world. And then projects like there's some really interesting stuff going on with Sea Alaska and Sustainable Southeast Conference around how do you get a vast array of different organizations and stakeholders to work on a regional approach to building a sustainable economy in the Tongass. Like amazing innovation. We don't think about it. It's not it's not like the next iPhone. It's a totally different kind of innovation. But I would argue much more important innovation because it's people learning how do you develop partnerships? How do you think regionally? How do you think holistically about an entire region? And there's some really exciting stuff. Kotzebue is another one. Some really forward-looking stuff based out of Kotzebue. I think we have plenty of examples.
Fantastic, thank you. Got an interesting question here. What would panelists think about a commissioner of innovation position at the state level, and what might that person work on?
So I'm looking at a president's former science advisor, and I've kind of studied the history of your office, Dr. Holdren, and we wouldn't have had spy satellites without the right science advisor for Eisenhower, and we wouldn't have had missile defense without the right science advisor for Reagan, and I don't think we would have had the energy and the commitment that we have to alternative energy and improving our energy without your time there. And we've had governors who have had science advisors. Governor Hickel had one, Governor Cooper had one. Governor Hickel's science advisor went on to be a member of PCAS, the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Tech. And I have to say that we've kind of replaced that by having a lot of fairly frequent meetings. We just had some members of the Governor's Cabinet speak to the Arctic Research Commission yesterday. The State Committee on Research gets cabinet members come talk about it, but I think it'd be a great idea to have an innovative, a technology, science, innovation thing, because when you talk about policy, I'll give you one right now. We're about to spend a whole lot of money on broadband to the bush, and I'm all for it, okay? But I'll also tell you, as a guy, it makes it, it's very hard for me to turn on my television now without having to choose my streamer and choose all these other things. I'm now using up a whole lot of broadband to do something that used to come in the house by coax. still comes in by house by coax, but it came in on a broadcast rather than just for me. And before that, I could do it off the air. And so we've got all these things that, have created this need for broadband, and we're not being critical about, why don't we use some of the old appropriate technologies too? If we had science advisors, innovation advisors, we might be able to stretch our dollars further. And that's just one example.
No, that's a great perspective. Thank you. Did you have a thought, Leslie?
Yeah, I always think that it's great to have a champion to help bring those technologies forward. So if you have somebody in the room or who's able to be at those meetings frequently, bring up those points instead of having groups try to organize meetings or try to get through staff. It's always great to have a champion and somebody there to help try to push that forward.
So yeah, so in your view, you see them more as a champion for this type of change and trying to push those things forward. Yeah.
Yes.
Fantastic. Bruno.
Yeah, honestly, I don't think I have a whole lot there. I think the advocate and having someone who's tuned in to the technology, specifically for Alaska, right? Because the technology is up here. A lot of us say it, right? If it works in Alaska, it can work anywhere. We have the hardest conditions, most innovative people, and and people who have been here for 10,000 years. So I'd be in support of that, and I like what you said, being the advocate and being a broadcaster for that.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Another audience question. What are some of Alaska's greatest assets in the innovation space in your experience? What are the things that really set us apart beyond what we're talking about as far as it's cold and windy and your thing will break? What are some of our real assets here?
Maybe to have a little bit of resonance with your previous question, I really think it's that ability to interact with Alaskans and with folks that are decision makers, folks who operate utilities and infrastructure in the state, having that the ability to have that intimate relationship with people that are making decisions in the state is really special. I also, just to put a plug in, I think microgrids is a really interesting area. Alaska has been running microgrids for decades before they became a sexy topic in the rest of the world. Amazing innovation and depth there. Aerospace, aviation, we're a legendary flying community. Ben, you know this, you're both a pilot. You fly both things with planes and things with rockets on them. And also just, kind of industry, I think the rest of the world is looking at how do we all make this energy transition. And so if Alaska can figure out how to become an energy state and make this transition in a way that allows us to keep our cars and our homes and our stoves and creates jobs and improves our way of life, that is a thing that the rest of the world is watching. And I think sometimes when you're here kind of in the trenches working on this stuff, you don't realize how big of a profile we have outside of Alaska, but I think it's an outsized influence. If we can figure this out as a state, it's a big deal for the planet. So. Great, thanks.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in here. Coming from Washington, D.C., and watching your senators, particularly Mr. Murkowski, talk about the energy transition, but coming from a traditional oil and gas state, she's been able to really talk about, from an authentic standpoint, the importance of transition, what it means for Alaska. You land here, my first time being here in Alaska, who wouldn't want to protect this, right? So I think there's just this moral authority that your representatives bring to conversations about that balance of economic growth, energy independence, but protecting the environment as well. I think Alaska's got it hands down.
Fantastic, thanks. Bruno?
Yeah, I'm thinking about this. Why have people thrived here for 10, 15,000 years? It's the flexibility, adaptability, the ingenuity of being able to adapt to that kind of changing environment. And now we're in a place where the environment is changing before our very, very eyes. You also have like we said, solving our back. If we can solve it in Alaska, we can solve it anywhere. Why? Because if we can solve the logistical issues, the supply chain issues, if we can figure out how to make it, again, buildings energy efficient and healthy up here, we can solve it down in California, right? So I'm going to throw that in there.
Okay, thanks. And Shana, you wanted to add
I
something?
think you actually took my thunder. I was going to say, no, that's okay. It's good we're all in agreement of the adaptability of the people. People that came here, that started here, have been adapting from day one. And so if we can learn from them and they're the innovation, that's what's going to help us move forward.
Yeah, me.
I'm just going to say, we rely so much on science for life and death issues here, probably more than, say, people who live in Schenectady, okay? To keep our fishing industry, when it almost died from overfishing in the 20s, overfishing in the 70s, we had to build the science capability. We had a huge shock with Exxon Valdez where we couldn't even figure out what was the impact because we didn't have the marine science. Shane and I have both been part of the Prince William Sound Science Center and this whole string of pearls of marine science institutions. What we did with health, I worked with some Harvard guys who were up here during COVID, and we had better testing here in Alaska because we had kind of gone the distance than they had at MGH during COVID-19. With aviation, we were the best test bed for ADS-B, the next gen of air traffic control anywhere, and we got to convince the FAA now to use it in Alaska to help save lives. It's astounding, but the point I'm making is that in a time when people are arguing about whether science is good or not good, we can't live without it.
Yeah. Absolutely, and I appreciate that. George, you want to jump in?
Yeah. One thing that I think we have is a culture that is a huge asset that we need to really leverage as much as we can. Teddy Roosevelt said, do what you can with what you have where you are. And I remember when I came up here the first time in 2012, I was worried. I was going out to a friend's house, and it was winter, and it was 20 below or something. I just got on a plane. I didn't have any gear, and I'm in a rental car. And so I'm like, what happens if I break down? And this person looked at me and said, this is Alaska. No one would drive by you. No one. Because Alaskans help each other. And that's true in Alaska, but it's true in the north. And I think we've talked a lot about Alaska here. I think there's so many ways for us to learn from the circumpolar. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. I've always said growing up that we're a place, and I think this is probably true across all of the Arctic, where you chop the wood, you're ready for winter, the freezer's full, you drive around with winter clothes and tools in the back of your car. I have no doubt that we as a member of the Arctic Nation and we as a state will have a very bright future because we have some of the most resourceful people that I've ever met in all of the things that I've done. So I just wanted to echo that as well. We're out of time. There was a lot of questions we didn't get to, and I encourage everybody to seek out our panelists at the museum tonight in between sessions and pull them aside and keep the conversation going. To the point earlier this morning, try to connect with them if you don't know them, and let's keep this sort of collaboration going. And I think that I've learned a lot, and I appreciate everything that you all brought to the panel today, and I'd like to invite a warm round of applause for everybody here. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Good job, everybody.